remember that big grin on Mr. Putin's face when he jumped into the US leader's vehicle, the Beast. It just seemed everything was done to please Mr. Putin. Will it be the same now? Now, we also have to remember why Hungary, because it's being led by a great friend of Mr. Putin and of Mr. Trump, Viktor Orban. So interesting there, and it's, my goodness, right on the border of Ukraine as well, relatively close. So I have a hard time believing that Mr. Putin won't give up his usual ways of trying to run circles around Mr. Trump. He's a master at this. But I think, again, we're seeing Mr. Trump feeling he has momentum, feeling he has the wind in his sails to, really reach another big accomplishment of his second term, and that is solving the war here in Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we are talking to Michael Bociurkiw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's also an author, journalist and founder of the Substack World Briefing. Michael, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Well, Michael, as we are speaking now, Trump has just announced that he will go and meet Vladimir Putin and that he has just had what he calls a productive phone call. What should we make of this announcement?
Head spinning doesn't even come close to describing what just happened. But yeah, the two leaders had a 2-hour phone call. That's a long time. And it was decided that they're going to, first of all, have a meeting of senior advisors from both sides in a yet to be disclosed location. My thinking it would either be Hungary or Turkey or one of the Gulf states. And then yet again, Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump will be meeting in Hungary, in Budapest. It's been announced. Mr. Trump said, I believe great progress was made with today's telephone conversation. But I got it right off the bat. I've got to say, after that circus in Alaska, whereas when you and I have discussed that it seemed to have been scripted by the Kremlin from start to finish, remember that big grin on Mr. Putin's face when he jumped into the US leader's vehicle, the Beast. It just seemed everything was done to please Mr. Putin. Will it be the same now? Now, we also have to remember why Hungary, because it's being led by a great friend of Mr. Putin and of Mr. Trump, Viktor Orban. So interesting there, and it's, my goodness, right on the border of Ukraine as well, relatively close. So I have a hard time believing that Mr. Putin won't give up his usual ways of trying to run circles around Mr. Trump. He's a master at this. But I think, again, we're seeing Mr. Trump feeling he has momentum, feeling he has the wind in his sails to, really reach another big accomplishment of his second term, and that is solving the war here in Ukraine. We don't get any indication whatsoever from Mr. Putin that he's prepared to come to the negotiating table. But if we think to what was achieved, especially getting Israeli negotiators to Sharm el-Sheikh to meet with Hamas leaders, that's quite an accomplishment. Maybe he could pull it off here. We'll see. But I can't help but be skeptical, because there's one thing that Mr. Putin wants, and that is to have all of Ukraine, not just parts of it, all of it. And of course, if that happens, that is the end of the Europe, that is the end of the NATO that we know.
And what does this mean for Zelensky's meeting with Trump tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good development in that sense, where Zelensky will have Mr. Trump's ear face to face. Mr. Trump deals much better with people face to face, and he'll be able to put things very straight to him. Say, look, this war has to finish. And if it doesn't, whether we get your Tomahawk missiles or not, we're preparing to inflict real pain on Mr. Putin's Russia, especially the energy sector. There are also moves by Mr. Zelensky to offer Ukraine's vast network of pipelines to Europe. I think he's also going to propose joint projects in arms manufacturing, sharing Ukraine's amazing technological development since the start of the war. So it's always best, I think, in these things to speak afterwards, to be the second one, because you're the last one to whisper into his ear. And, credit to Trump for doing what he has in the past, few days, but he does have that short attention span. And I think that will work to Mr. Zelensky's benefit to be speaking to him after Mr. Putin. One last thing, we've been hearing again from Mr. Trump about, and as recently as the Sharm el-Sheikh meeting, about ending the Ukraine war, about the number of casualties each and every day. I did not expect to hear myself saying this on air, but I have to say it, is that I think the death and destruction, as we saw happening in Gaza, but also as we saw happening with the hostages on the Israeli side, has actually impacted Mr. Trump. He does seem to feel for them. And, his interesting element here, too, is Melania Trump has inserted herself into the war that none of us expected to in writing that letter to Mr. Putin that was given to him in Alaska, saying that I'd like to play a part in helping the exchange of children from Russia to Ukraine, and the other side, they're the way too. So when you take all of these things together, there's a kind of new momentum since Alaska that may lead us to a leader summit of Zelensky and Putin, maybe with Mr. Trump there. One last quick thing, given the geography, Hungary is very close to Ukraine. They're a neighboring country. We can't rule out Mr. Trump calling Zelensky and saying, hey, come right over, let's get this summit done, and maybe we'll have interesting results.
So, Michael, other than this meeting with Putin that Trump has just announced, what else might we expect Zelensky to be discussing with Trump at this meeting he has tomorrow at the White House? And what should we be looking for coming out of that meeting?
Yeah, well, as I told people in your former colony of Australia yesterday, Mr. Zelensky has now become such a frequent visitor at the White House. There's a joke going around that they may give him his own parking space. But isn't it amazing how far we've gone, right, from earlier this year with horrible dressing down, and now it's his second time after that, and then there is a tete-a-tete in the Vatican as well. So I think he's also catching on, Lewis, that there's a good balance to be maintained with Mr. Trump between being a little bit pushy and tough, but also buttering him up. We saw that at Sharm el-Sheikh with all the world leaders flocking there to pretty much on his command almost. But also more recently, my Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, was back at the White House really buttering up Trump. And of course, your Keir Starmer is the master at it. So it's basically Trump doing global diplomacy by shakedown, if you ask me. But in this regard, I think he's on a roll after the, let's say, at least temporary win in the Middle East with bringing peace to Gaza, at least for now. It's very, very shaky. And I think he wants to go on and use that momentum to solve the war in Ukraine by meeting Mr. Zelensky, finding out in more detail what exactly he wants, but at the same time, putting on more pressure on Mr. Putin, which I know we're going to be talking about in a second. But, it's an unconventional form of diplomacy that is pretty much immune to the forces of gravity of U.S. domestic politics. Unlike Mr. Biden, Mr. Trump can do whatever he wants and not have pushback by the Republicans. And secondly, Mr. Trump isn't afraid to speak, for example, to non-state combatants like Hamas to get the job done. That's something very, very different with the previous administration. So I think if you take all of that together, including the degradation of energy infrastructure in Russia, it's very, very, very good timing for Mr. Zelensky. He knows that it's finally gotten into Mr. Trump's head that Putin cannot be persuaded, he's not malleable, and harsher measures need to be really brought in to bring him to the negotiating table.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, these harder measures and this pressure the US now seems pretty keen on applying on the Kremlin. Trump's continuing to discuss the idea of supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Today, saying that Ukraine wants to go offensive and suggesting there might even be other supplies the US could provide. All of this really is going to be getting Putin and the Kremlin hot under the collar, isn't it?
Yeah, and before I get to the Tomahawks, we also have to talk about the Flamingo missile as well that Ukraine has developed. It's a quarter or so of the cost, or a third of the cost of the Tomahawk. And according to a report I read today, it could be available to Ukraine as soon as later this year. Apparently, it packs even more punch than the Tomahawk. Although the Tomahawk missile, or whether you're talking about the Flamingo, it does put much more range into the hands of the Ukrainians, Moscow and beyond. And currently, they've damaged 16 of 21 refineries in Russia. That represents about 38% of refining capacity, to the point where those long lineups at petrol stations, which you and I talked about last time, are now getting closer and closer to Moscow. So the pain is really beginning to be felt by the average Russian. And well, not all of us, but some of us may remember, I believe it was during Richard Nixon's administration when gas pumps went dry and what problems that caused. I think Putin is also thinking of that. But, in response to this, the Russians have, as they normally do since the start of the war, they're rattling the saber and saying, well, these Tomahawks are an escalation. After all, we don't know if they have conventional or nuclear warheads on them, and we will have to react in kind. Well, they've been saying that since the start of the war, when Ukraine was getting tanks, when it was getting F-16s, that this is unacceptable. But I think they're less and less in a position to call the shots. And then again, Mr. Trump, seeing that Putin is not reacting to his overtures, to his pleas to get to the negotiating table, wants to arm Ukraine even further. And we must remember as well, it's not only the physical missiles we're talking about, it's also the targeting information. Ukrainians being given targeting information by the Americans where exactly to strike. And I'm also it's also my understanding that the Ukrainians are getting such precise information that they're able to strike at the heart of these refineries, inflicting even more damage. So, excuse me, take all of that together, and it's quite a development in Ukraine's favor.
Yeah, and one thing we have seen in response from Russia, though, is a quite increasingly aggressive air campaign of their own, targeting places across Ukraine, also targeting energy infrastructure, but civilian infrastructure as we head towards winter. I should really start by asking what the situation is where you are in Odessa, because there have been yet more strikes even since we spoke last week on a...
Right. Yeah, not very good. I mean, we had air raid sirens throughout the night, but it was really other regions of Ukraine, 5 or 6, that were struck, including critical infrastructure. And it's also my understanding that the grid now, it's supposed to be less integrated in the sense that some regions can continue functioning while others are perhaps in the dark. But I was walking around quite a bit today, and you did hear the sound of generators. You did have outages. That's part of the reason why I may look a little bit more scruffier today. And the outages have extended to the internet and also to mobile data, which I am on right now. So, Ukraine, it's important to point out that Ukraine has become such a digitized economy that when these things happen, it's not only light outages, but it's also payment systems, for instance, go down. Small businesses have to maintain their generators. If they have them, they have to fuel them up. That really raises costs. The other thing that's happening, unseasonably cool temperatures. We were getting pretty close to 0 Celsius overnight in some regions of Ukraine. And the so-called heating season has been pushed back now to November 1st, some say middle of November. That's when the central heating comes on. And that's more of an issue when you go to the outer regions, when you talk to pensioners or whatever. They don't have fancy air conditioning units that also provide heat or a fireplace. So The Russians are really, really hitting hard at energy infrastructure this time. It's reminiscent of, I guess it was 2 winters ago when we had long, long outages almost on a daily basis. So that's happening in a lot of Ukraine. And that on top of the slowing economy, on top of inflation, it stacks up to make it pretty difficult for the average Ukrainian. One more thing, if I may, the strikes overnight, according to Mr. Zelensky, also included drones with the cluster munitions on them. That's the first time I've heard of that on a drone payload. So that obviously inflicts more damage, especially when it hits a power plant, because they become much more difficult to repair.
There is actually a sort of link here, isn't there, with these increasing Russian strikes on Ukraine, because it seems that they've been part of the reason that Trump has been convinced that Putin is not really willing to come to the table or negotiate honestly, because every time he seems to get some sort of breakthrough, it's followed up by pretty intensive Russian strikes.
Yeah, we're seeing worrisome Russian gains on various parts of the front line, including near Kharkiv, in Kharkiv Oblast, closer to Russia, where they're getting some territory. But there's also concern, according to the Institute to the Study of the War and others, of Russia gaining Pokrovsk, this so-called fortress belt of various strategic military centers, which would give them the advantage to take the rest of Donetsk. Now, the Ukrainians are fighting back with everything they have, but we also are in a new place right now where we weren't perhaps a year ago, where again, they're able to strike very, very deep inside Russia, not only to energy facilities, but also airfields as well. So you're seeing also the Russians taking more measures to protect airfields, munition storage facilities, things like that. Putin is under a lot of pressure right now. And there was a report yesterday, I believe it's been verified, of Russians singing a song that's not very complimentary to Mr. Putin, that has apparently been banned since the start of the war. Whether that's a sign of kind of Gen Z popular uprising that could really escalate, I don't know, but that is something to watch as well. Winter there as well.
Yes, indeed. Well, elsewhere away from Ukraine itself, President Trump claims that Indian Premier Narendra Modi has promised him that India will stop buying Russian oil. Is that likely to worry the Kremlin in terms of their exports?
Look, I'm on Indian television quite a bit, and last time I was on, it was made very, very clear to me that the Indians aren't very happy with this, because they claim that they were pressured by the United States to actually buy Russian oil so that they could refine it. They do have a lot of refining capacity, and sell it to Europe, kind of to cleanse the oil, if you will, and then that goes to Europe. But they're a fast growing economy. They need this oil. They are making efforts to switch to other sources, but that will take time. It will take time for them to switch, for example, from using Russian armaments to keep their armed forces supplied. But I think you're also seeing the BRICS economies, so not only India, but also China as well, Brazil, acting a little bit more independently. I think they're kind of Trump-proofing themselves ahead of more pressure from a president who likes to use tariffs. So that will be interesting to watch. Louis, there's one more thing I'm sorry I forgot to mention when it comes to Russia and Ukrainian strikes. There are also pretty credible reports that Russia is so desperate to up its game in terms of air defenses that it's quietly asked the Turks to return their S-400 systems back to Russia so they could protect their skies better. Apparently, Turkey hasn't even used them. But the fact that they're going there and saying we need them back tells you something as well.
An interesting move then for Russia to go to a NATO member state that it has been calling the enemy for the last nearly 4 years now, and ask for weapons it sold to a NATO member state back. That seems a bizarre thing for Russia to attempt.
Well, look, Turkey is a Black Sea neighbor of ours. I've worked with them in the OSCE, and they're very, very good at what they do. It's their own brand of homegrown diplomacy. They're able to play both sides very well. And, also Mr. Modi, he, when this pressure was being put on India by Mr. Trump, he went to his people and said self-resilience. We need to be more reliant on ourselves. We're not going to succumb to this pressure. And I think you're going to be seeing that more and more. And we're definitely seeing that from China as well. They historically, for generations, have been knowing of waiting out potential or real foes. So this is something that I don't think is that well understood by a president who is very combative, shakedown diplomacy, and he likes fast gains. I don't think he has a kind of long-range view into what may happen next. It's a very complex world out there, and I think he'll also be seeing that very soon in the Middle East too.
And the White House has also said it's been putting pressure on Japan to stop buying Russian energy. Alongside Ukraine's strike campaign into Russia, is there enough being done by the US, by the West, to seriously hamper Russia's war economy?
No, absolutely not. I mean, when you think about it, where we sit in Europe, we're at in between the 18th and 19th sanctions packages. You still have Russian gas being purchased by EU countries. You still have Russian-owned steel-making facilities within a stone's throw of Brussels. That's all everybody needs to know. I think there's a lot of hypocrisy there. The EU foreign policy chief, Kaya Kayas, was here the other day. No one really knew what she was doing here. But I think there's a lot of, she's being looked upon as quite the hypocrite. On the one hand, coming from Estonia, where she does, remembering what communism was like, but not really stepping up to the plate when it comes, for example, refunding Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, when their funding was cut off by Mr. Trump. Let's not forget, that's a very, very important part of the hybrid warfare, the West hybrid warfare against Russia. And again, as I've said, I think with you many times, had the EU come up with the wherewithal, the willingness to really strangle the Russian economy with 19 sanction packages worth of sanctions, we wouldn't be where we are right now. We've got to wait. I hear this a lot in my travels in Ukraine. I just came back from Kiev. We've got to get away from, the charade the other day when Ms. Kayas came here, basically comes across as a selfie-taking session, and then going home and not really giving Ukraine what it needs, and not really also putting the noose onto the Russian economy the way it probably could.
On the other side of that, Germany has announced $2 billion more of funding for Ukraine. There's also discussions of funding a US weapons package as well. It's the latest in this series of European funding plans. But Ukraine, on the other hand, Ukraine's defense minister says Ukraine will need $120 billion in the coming year. At least around half of that can be covered by Ukraine itself. But how big is the challenge for funding Ukraine's defense in the coming year, do you think?
Oh, absolutely enormous. I was in closed-door briefings at the UNGA, on the sidelines of the UNGA, and the Ukrainian economy is not in very good shape right now. A $3.5 billion a month gap in the Ukrainian economy, budget gap. It's very, very difficult for Ukraine to make it these days and make ends meet. So, it's very good that Herr has come up with the money, but Ukraine is probably also asking, where is the Taurus missile that we asked for that Germany was supposed to provide? This also goes back to the shaky political grounds a lot of these Western leaders are. I mean, look at what's happening with Emmanuel Macron right now in France. He's barely hanging on. He's on to his third prime minister this year. And Herr he's coalition government. So there's only certain distance he can go in terms of pushing for aid to Ukraine. I think with Mr. Zelensky on his way to Washington, this is probably also in the back of his mind. He probably hears the clock ticking with the shifting political sands. We've seen recent elections which have not gone the way the West would have preferred in our little neighborhood here, so to speak. So that's a big factor too that needs to be kept in mind.
And just finally, Michael, as you've mentioned, you're speaking to us from Odessa, where Mayor Hennady Trukhanov has been removed from his post. What's going on there?
There's this saying, an eagle doesn't hunt for flies. And for Mr. Zelensky, you would think he has other priorities on his mind rather to really try and bring down the mayor of Odessa, the third biggest city in Ukraine, very strategic, of course, because of its port. I've heard both sides of the story here. Basically, the reason Zelensky came after Mr. Trukhanov, who he doesn't like, they're from different political stripes, is that it's alleged that Mr. Trukhanov has a Russian passport. And a commission formed by the president looked into this, and the State Security Service did, and they said, yep, it's a real passport. So what Mr. Zelensky did, he stripped him of citizenship, which ostensibly disqualifies him to be mayor. But Trukhanov has a bigger ego than the state of Colorado, and he says, no, I'm staying on. He's being defiant, and it's up to my own city councilors to decide whether I can go on. But look, this is also a guy who has quite the rap sheet. He has a host of corruption charges against him involving shady real estate deals. There was an absurd time near the start of the war where he was showing up at bombing sites with a detection bracelet around his ankle. But you know what? This is a city that is very feisty, very independent. Very few people actually voted for Zelensky or a servant of the people. I haven't met one person, actually. So now the idea is for Zelensky to impose a martial law administration, basically, and we don't know who will be sent from Kiev, but that's going over here like a lead balloon. And I think people are saying, let's decide amongst ourselves who's going to become mayor. I have to throw in one more thing because I've been living here, as you know, and Trukhanov, has also been negligent. I've seen up close how poorly maintained the city sidewalks are. There was a big flood here. Something like 2 months of rain came down in about 7 hours. There were like almost 10 deaths, a lot of damage that could have been avoided. Zelensky is also, I think, has used that as an opportunity. Okay, let's go get him. So, I don't think he would be missed. But the important thing to underline here, well, there's two things, is let the people of Odessa decide. But also, when you hear criticism from members of parliament like Oleksiy Goncharenko, who comes from Poroshenko's party, but also others as well, criticizing Zelensky, you're seeing a bigger crack in the kind of political consensus that we had at the start of the war, where no one's going to criticize the government. There's a war going on. Let's focus on defeating the enemy. I think that's something Mr. Zelensky has to be very careful about, because don't forget, there's also Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, who Zelensky has gone after. He's gone after other city administrations. Again, one would think he's got bigger priorities. One last point on this, because I did mention this in my New York Times op-ed a while back, is give the Odessans the opportunity to have an election and vote in a mayor. Because of martial law, there are no elections, but I think they could stress test the system by having a local election, see how it goes, and that would also, I think, bolster Mr. Zelensky's democratic credentials, which are being a little bit questioned right now.
Well, we'll see how that develops, and I'm sure we'll be back with you on that at some point in the future, Michael. But Michael Bociurkiw, Senior Fellow at Atlantic Council, author, journalist, and founder of the Substack World Briefing. Thank you very much for joining me today on Frontline.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.